you ever been in a silence so profound it feels like a physical weight? Not just the absence of noise, but an active, oppressive quiet that seems to swallow sound before it can be born. There is such a place at the base of Mount Fuji in Japan. A sea of trees so dense and dark that for centuries it has been the chosen final destination for those wishing to disappear. This is the story of Aokigahara, the suicide forest, and the chorus of whispers that never leaves. Aokigahara Jukai, the Sea of Trees, is a place of haunting, natural beauty, formed on hardened lava from an ancient eruption of Mount Fuji. Its floor is a twisted, uneven mass of volcanic rock, covered in a thick carpet of moss that swallows sound. The forest is unnaturally dense, the trees growing so close together that they block out the sun and wind, creating a perpetual, gloomy twilight. It is infamous not for its geology, but for the hundreds of souls who have chosen it as their final resting place. Kenji Tanaka was not one of those souls, a young, skeptical sociologist from Tokyo. He was researching the copycat phenomenon of the forest's reputation. He believed the stories of hauntings, of the yūrei, the tormented spirits of the dead, were simply a cultural manifestation of the profound sadness that permeated the woods. Armed with a GPS, a high-sensitivity audio recorder, and a roll of bright orange trail tape, he intended to spend 48 hours within the forest's depths, documenting its psychological, not supernatural, impact. He ignored the ominous signs at the entrance, the ones that urged visitors to reconsider their actions, and offered a helpline number. He stepped off the well-trodden path and into the true forest. The transition was immediate and jarring. The distant sounds of the road vanished, replaced by an all-encompassing silence. His boots made no sound on the thick moss. The air was cold still and carried the heavy, sweet scent of damp earth and decay. It felt like stepping into a vacuum. Within the first hour, his modern technology began to fail. The GPS signal scrambled, the screen displaying a nonsensical, jittering map. His compass spun lazily, rendered useless by the high concentration of magnetic iron in the volcanic soil. He was forced to rely on his trail tape and his own senses, a prospect that was suddenly far more daunting than he had anticipated. The trees, gnarled and ancient, seemed to press in on him, their forms looking like twisted, agonized figures in the dim light. He soon began to find them, the sad, discarded remnants of lives, cut short. A single, mud-caked woman's shoe, a faded photograph of a smiling family, propped against a tree root, a length of rope, still tied to a high branch, swaying gently in a non-existent breeze. Each discovery was a small, silent scream, a testament to the despair the forest had witnessed. Kenji meticulously photographed each one, but a cold dread, an emotion he couldn't rationalize, began to creep into his heart. As dusk began to settle, painting the forest in deeper shades of gray and black. He heard the first sound that was not his own. It was a whisper, a soft, sibilant sigh that seemed to come from all directions at once. He froze, straining his ears. The whisper solidified into a single, sorrowful Japanese word, a woman's voice. Motorenai. You can't go back. He spun around, his heart pounding. But there was nothing but the endless, silent trees. He made camp in a small clearing. Though clearing was a generous term for a patch of ground where the trees were merely a few feet further apart. He built a small, smokeless fire, its flickering light a pathetic defense against the encroaching, absolute darkness. The feeling of being watched was no longer a subtle prickle on his neck. It was a tangible pressure, the collective weight of 1,000 unseen eyes. He turned on his audio recorder, hoping to capture the strange whisper again. Sleep was a distant luxury. He was startled awake around 2 a.m. by the sound of weeping. It was the sound of a man, his cries filled with a grief so profound it was almost inhuman. The weeping was close, just beyond the ring of his firelight. Kenji called out, his voice trembling, asking if the person needed help. The weeping stopped instantly, replaced by a chilling, dead silence. When he played back the audio later, his own voice was there, but the sound of the weeping man was completely absent. The next morning, he discovered that his carefully tied orange trail tape, his only lifeline to the outside world, had been systematically torn down and shredded during the night. The pieces were scattered around his campsite in a perfect, mocking circle. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He was now officially lost. The forest was no longer a passive research subject. It was an active participant, a predator that had just cut him off from the herd. He tried to backtrack, using the sun as a guide, but the dense canopy made it impossible to get a clear bearing. The forest seemed to actively work against him. Paths he was certain he had just walked would vanish behind him, replaced by impassable thickets of trees. The landscape seemed to shift and rearrange itself when he wasn't looking. He was walking in circles, the same uniquely twisted tree appearing in his path again and again, a silent, gnarled sentinel of his failure. It was then that he started seeing them, the figures at the edge of his vision, pale, shimmering outlines of people, their forms translucent, their faces obscured by shadow. A man in a business suit hanging from a branch, his form fading in and out of view. A young woman in a school uniform, sitting at the base of a tree, her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. They were never there when he turned to look directly. Just fleeting, sanity-shredding glimpses of the forest's eternal residents. Hunger and dehydration began to set in, blurring the lines between reality and hallucination. The whispers were constant now, a chorus of sorrowful, pleading voices. They called his name. They told him to rest, to give up, to join them. They promised an end to his fear and exhaustion. The Yurei were not just echoes, they were lures, their despair a psychic hook designed to snag the minds of the living and drag them down into the same bottomless pit of hopelessness. He stumbled upon a small, dilapidated tent, its fabric rotting and green with moss. He cautiously looked inside, and his stomach churned. A skeleton, clad in the tattered remains of hiking gear, sat propped against a backpack. In its bony hand, it clutched a small, leather-bound journal. With trembling fingers, Kenji took the journal. The final entry was a frantic, almost illegible scrawl that spoke of the whispers, of the forest that wouldn't let him leave, and of a promise of peace if he just looked at the mother. What was the mother? As Kenji read those words, a new sound cut through the whispers. It was a low, resonant hum, a sound that felt both like a lullaby and a funeral dirge. It was coming from deeper within the forest, a strange, compelling melody that seemed to pull at him, promising answers, promising an end to his ordeal. Against his better judgment, driven by a desperate curiosity, he began to walk towards the sound, the journal clutched in his hand. The humming grew louder, and the forest around him changed. The trees became older, larger, their branches intertwining to form a dense, cathedral-like ceiling. There were no remnants of the lost here. No shoes, no ropes, no tents. The ground was clear, the moss a perfect, undisturbed carpet. He had entered a place that felt sacred and deeply, fundamentally wrong. He had reached the heart of Aokigahara. In the center of this grove stood a tree. It was a colossal, ancient specimen, easily 1,000 years old, its trunk impossibly wide, its bark the color of bleached bone. It was the source of the humming, a sound that vibrated from its very wood and hanging from its lower branches, like gruesome Christmas ornaments, were dozens of bodies in various states of decay. But they were not hanging by ropes. They were being held, absorbed, by the tree itself, their limbs partially fused with the pale bark. This was the mother. It was not a tree. It was a carnivorous, psychic entity that had taken the form of one. It was the true source of the forest's malevolence, a being that fed on human despair. The suicides were not just tragedies that happened in the forest. They were offerings. The Yurei were not just lost souls. They were the echoes of its past meals, used as lures to draw in new victims. As Kenji stared in horror, the faces of the absorbed bodies turned to look at him. Their eyes were hollow sockets, but he could feel their collective gaze. Their mouths opened in a silent, synchronized scream. The humming intensified, becoming a deafening roar that filled his mind. And the whispers became a single, powerful voice, a chorus of the damned that spoke directly into his soul. It offered him a place among them, a final release from his worldly pain, a chance to become one with the mother. He felt his own will begin to dissolve, his own minor sorrows and anxieties amplified 1,000 times. The thought of giving up, of just lying down and letting the forest take him, was intoxicatingly seductive. He saw his own face begin to appear on the bark of the tree, his features pale and serene. He was being consumed, not just his body, but his very identity, his spirit being drawn into the collective consciousness of the entity. He felt a phantom touch on his shoulder, a cold, skeletal hand. He turned to see the spirit of the man from the tent. His face, a translucent mask of terror. The ghost pointed a trembling finger at the base of the great tree. There, half buried in the moss and roots, was a small stone shrine, a Jizo statue, the kind meant to protect the souls of lost children and travelers. It was covered in black, creeping lichen, but it was still intact. A fragment of a forgotten childhood memory surfaced in Kenji's mind. His grandmother telling him that such spirits could not cross a truly sacred threshold. It was a desperate, foolish hope, but it was all he had. He broke free from the psychic pull of the tree, his legs screaming in protest, and scrambled towards the small stone statue. The roar of the tree intensified into a shriek of pure rage. He threw himself at the base of the Jizo statue, curling into a ball and pressing his face against the cold, sacred stone. The moment he made contact, the deafening psychic noise vanished, replaced by the profound, natural silence of the forest. He looked up. The great, bone-white tree was still there, its gruesome ornaments still hanging from its branches. But its power, its direct influence, could not seem to reach him within the small, invisible sanctuary of the shrine. He stayed there for what felt like an eternity, not daring to move. As the sun set and rose again, he watched as the pale, shimmering figures of the Yurei drifted between the trees, their mournful faces turning towards him, their whispers begging him to leave the shrine's protection. They were prisoners, and they envied his small, temporary freedom. He understood now that the forest didn't just kill you, it enslaved you. When he finally found the strength to move, he did not try to find his way back. He simply picked a direction away from the mother tree and walked, keeping the Jizo statue directly at his back. He did not look behind him. He walked for hours, his body numb with exhaustion, until he stumbled through the tree line and collapsed onto the hard, welcome asphalt of a service road. The sounds of a distant car, the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. He was found by a forest patrol, severely dehydrated, malnourished, and in a state of profound shock. His hair, once jet black, was now streaked with patches of gray. He was clutching the dead man's journal so tightly that his knuckles were white. He tried to tell them what he had seen, the shifting paths, the whispers, the mother tree, but they looked at him with pity, dismissing his words as the fevered hallucinations of a man lost and starving. The journal was his only proof, but when the authorities opened it, the final, frantic pages he had read were now completely blank. The ink vanished as if it had never existed. The official report listed his ordeal as a cautionary tale of a reckless researcher who had underestimated the natural dangers of Aokigahara. The supernatural element was dismissed entirely. Kenji was left alone with a truth too terrible to be believed. He never returned to his life as a sociologist. The man of science had died in that forest, replaced by a haunted survivor. He now lives in a small, quiet apartment, the windows always covered, the silence of his home, a constant, terrifying reminder of the deeper silence of the woods. He is plagued by nightmares of a bone-white tree and a chorus of whispering, hungry faces. He knows the yūrei are not the true evil of Aokigahara. They are its victims, the first line of its supernatural immune system. They are the sad, lonely gatekeepers, their own despair used as a weapon to break the will of those who enter, to prepare them for the feast. They are the echoes of the mother's endless, ravenous appetite. The forest continues to call to the desperate and the broken-hearted. The signs at its entrance still offer a chance for reconsideration, but they are a futile gesture. They cannot warn against the true nature of the forest's danger. They warn against suicide, but they cannot warn against a place that actively cultivates it, that harvests it, that feeds on it as a fundamental part of its existence. Kenji often wonders about the other Jizo shrines that are said to be scattered throughout the forest, lost and forgotten. Are they fading sanctuaries? Are they the only thing holding back the full, insatiable hunger of the mother tree? And what will happen when the last of these sacred stones is finally swallowed by the moss and the roots, and the entity's power becomes absolute? The final, lingering horror for Kenji is not what he saw, but what he now feels. A part of him never left the forest. On quiet nights, he can still hear the faint, humming lullaby of the mother tree, a distant call to come home. He feels the collective sorrow of the Yurei as a dull ache in his own soul. He escaped with his life, but he fears he may have lost something far more important in the process. The sea of trees is patient. It has fed for centuries on the deepest sorrows of humanity, and its roots run deep, not just into the volcanic soil, but into the very psyche of the nation. And the question it leaves us with is not whether the ghosts are real, but whether the forest itself is a conscious entity. And if it is, we have to wonder, is its hunger confined to its own dark borders, or is it slowly, silently growing?